Oh, hey, Rich, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason, good to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm good, and I'm hoping we can get right into the wrist check. I don't know if you listen to the Fratello Talks or Fratello on Air podcast. I have some problems with the German language because their translation for wrist check is Handgelenks Kontrolle, and I just think wrist check sounds a lot better than that.
Handgelenks Controle. That might be my fantasy football team next year. Handgelenks Controle. But
I
yeah,
think
let's
that's
get
a
into
good
the wrist
choice.
check. And I appreciate you reminding me of the wrist check because everyone knows. I mean, everyone I talk to that has a podcast, they're like, man, we talk about watches and we forget wrist checks until later in the show. It's like I'm guilty of it the same. But today, I have on my one of my newest babies, my Planet Ocean 22
Congratulations on that one. I think that's one of the best Planet Oceans out there. I love the orange numerals. And what's the size on that one?
45.5.
Looks like a 40 on your wrist.
There it is, 45.5. It's it's a little loose because shout out Tom. Tom Place gave me two links from his motorcycle accident, and I'm glad you're okay from that accident, Tom. But it doesn't have any micro adjust on the clasp, the OG original clasp. So I'm at that weird thing. I got a half link here that I might try, but
Right.
it's just a little because I have a 7.5. Well, I think I have like a 7 5/8 inch wrist now. I think it's gotten a little bit bigger, but it's still, I don't mind it being a little loose. It's just yeah, I don't want to talk 20 minutes about my Planet Ocean. It is a wonderful watch. I'm very happy to have it, and it feels right at home on my wrist. What
Great
about
watch
you?
and congratulations. So
Thank you.
today I've got the Omega Seamaster Necton edition. So this one's got a titanium laser ablated bezel, and you can't see the case back, but it's got a Necton research vessel that's etched into the case. The dial, it's hard to see on the video, but the dial has, it's sort of a matte gray dial, but with black or gray waves, and it just reflects the light beautifully. The handset's terrific. This right now is my favorite watch. I can get into the story behind this one later, but it's hard to put any watch on my wrist besides this one.
Yeah, it's that watch is pretty snazzy, and it's the little things too. When I learned about it, but like the idea of the titanium bezel, I was like, man, see, that looks fantastic. And then all the pictures you post, and so for everyone watching, I'm going to do a new thing where I post a little story with the podcast when it releases, and I'll be able to put pictures of Rich's watches in there with little descriptions and stuff. So if you want to go, because I know sometimes in the video, 7 seconds isn't long enough to look at someone's watch, and then sometimes you maybe want to have a cup of coffee and take a look at pictures of people's watches because that's what we do. And so I'll have an accompanying article with all of Rich's pictures. Thanks to Rich. But I just remember your joy when you got that piece, and I know the story behind it too. So I thought it was a pretty cool story, all in all, because it's so serendipitous. That's all I'll say. The story seems very serendipitous. Like it's a once in a lifetime opportunity where like two ships cross in the night and a deal happens. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. So
Yeah,
Rich, oh, go ahead.
I ended up trading this one for another Seamaster to be ironic about that. So the one I had was the white dial one with the splash of red text on the dial, and I liked it a lot, but didn't love it. And when I saw the chance to get the Necton, there's no way I could turn that down. It's just a unique, rare opportunity to get a watch without any money out of pocket.
Yeah, and I haven't seen. I've only been doing this for like 5 years, but I haven't seen any Nectons posted or talked about a lot. And so I actually had to go look it up when you were talking about it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because you just don't, Omega makes a lot of different Seamasters, but still like it's so cool. I wondered like, well, why don't we hear about this one more? Because some of the design elements are pretty snazzy and all that stuff. So pretty interesting piece. And I'm happy that you have it because I know that you're happy with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Rich, you've been on the pod before. Anyone watching been on the pod before. I really have gotten into the jam of interviewing fellow enthusiasts because I feel like we are the people that make this whole thing go, whatever it is. We're the engine behind the hobby, blah blah blah, whatever you want to say. And I love learning about people that run companies and have huge followings, but I really do enjoy having just the general conversations that we have as watch enthusiasts. Like if we lived in the same town, I'm pretty sure by now we'd already had dinner one night and shot the stuff about some watches or had a few drinks or whatever. Um,
Absolutely.
and so this is a way to be able to do it and put it on camera. And I think the coolest part is it's a way to capture a moment in time in someone's enthusiast journey, right? Like, where were you right here, right now? And I think one of the best ways to do this is start off by what someone's professional background is. So, and personal background as much as you want to share. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how it relates to your watch enthusiasm stuff?
So professionally, I'm an employment lawyer at a firm called Miller Canfield based out of Detroit, and I spend about 50% of my time in Detroit and then 50% in New York, where we've got a shoebox-sized apartment in the city. Uh, the firm I'm with has about 174 lawyers, and they do everything under the sun. And my specialty is defending employers and defending managers who are accused of discrimination or harassment. I also handle non-competition work where somebody has taken trade secrets to a different company and is trying to use those, and I'll help get those trade secrets back. And then part of my practice is giving guidance and advice to employers that are trying to decide what to do with employees. Should we terminate this employee? Do they deserve discipline? If an employee doesn't return from leave or they're laid off, how do they handle that? Reductions in force, all that sort of good stuff. I will say it allows me complete freedom to work any 12 to 14-hour days that I want. So that's really helpful. But I've been doing this since 2001, and I've been with the current firm for 22 years. So a pretty long tenure there. And the way this all relates to watches and time is, in my profession, everything, number one, is charged to a client by the billable hour. So you're always tracking time based on a task, and you're always recording time, because if you don't, then you don't receive any payment for it. And then typically my days are really, really busy from start to finish. There's not much time to take a break or much time to take a break for lunch. So I need to constantly be monitoring emails and constantly be tracking time towards getting guidance and advice out to clients or getting filings done with the court that all has to be done either before 5 p.m. or midnight. So I'm constantly looking at a watch to track how long has it been since the client asked for the answer. I'm constantly using bezels to time, can I get this done within 60 minutes or 30 minutes? So watches are a part of my, not just part of my appreciation of the hobby, but also a part of my professional day every single day from start to finish.
Oh wow. Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing that a lot of people don't think about until you actually need a lawyer. Is the how you get charged. But it makes sense, right? Because I know a lot of people that do writing and they do the same thing, like copyright. Maybe not down to the minute, but usually by the hour, like and they figure out their own rates. Like, okay, if I'm going to take an article on, I'm going to spend 4 hours on this article, and if I do that, that gives me this hourly rate. And I think I, th- I really think if more people thought about stuff that way, they'd go into business for themselves. But it's pretty funny. So that's the professional part about it. And so anything personal, like personally, how did you end up? I think this is probably the coolest part of anyone's journey. Personally, how did you end up getting interested in horology and timepieces?
So good question. So when I must have been in seventh or eighth grade. My dad once a year or twice a year would go to a jewelry shop that was nearby and would buy either a necklace or earrings or a ring for my mom. And I really dislike going on those trips because there's nothing about jewelry that I like and have ever liked. But when I was in seventh or eighth grade, I went and the owner of the jewelry shop was there, and I noticed he had a watch on. And I didn't know this now, but or I didn't know back then, but now I knew it's an IWC Porsche Designs collaboration. It was one of those watches from probably the late 80s, early 90s. And I noticed it on his wrist, and I asked him, tell me about that watch. And he started to move his arm around, and he said, do you know what I'm doing right now? And I said, no. He said, I'm winding the watch with the power of my movement. And I'm not an engineer. I'm not mechanically
Yeah.
inclined at all. And I thought, well, what is this magic? Like, how do you wind these mechanical gears with the power of your movement? And I was fascinated by it. So I started looking it up and asking people questions about it. And I just thought it was absolutely beyond fascinating to know that there was a rotor connected to a spring and your movement actually did wind that watch. And as long as you had it on and as long as you were moving, you could run that watch forever. And that hooked me right away. From that moment forward, I was absolutely obsessed with watches. I would, to the extent there was the early internet, I would go online and try to find out as much as I could about watches. There was a magazine called Watch Time that was at the bookstores back then, like Barnes and Noble. And in ninth grade, 10th grade, high school, I would pore over those magazines and I would read them once, twice, three, four times, just because I could not get enough information about watches.
Yeah, I really wish I had been around for watch time. I don't know. It's not still around, is it?
I think it's still around.
Oh, really? I need to go find it. I did not do my due diligence on researching that, but yeah, for anyone watching, I've been up for quite a long time. It's been a good day, but a long day already. So Rich, you talked about being a lawyer and all that stuff, and you know where you went to school and being in the Michigan area. And one of the interesting questions I had that I, I haven't had a chance to ask anyone yet because I haven't had anyone that like ties in that close to a regional area. But being from Michigan, being a Red Wings fan and all that stuff, like the licensing tie-ins, is there any brand that you know of that's done like really, because they can be a little cheesy sometimes. You can get a little over the top. But have you ever seen a licensing agreement? Because like some of these colleges, people are really, really proud to go there and they have associations and alumni and all that stuff. But that was a question
Right.
that just popped up. Have you seen one or do you know of any?
So that's a great question. I do know of one. So as you have sort of alluded to, colleges and university tie-ins are a big deal in the Big Ten and in the Michigan area. And I went to Michigan State for undergrad and for law school. So when I see the colors maize and blue together, that does not give me good feelings. That's the rival school. University of Michigan is an outstanding academic institution. They're a great educational school. They just won the national championship, and they have historically been way more successful than Michigan State. So I've always had sort of an underdog mentality because I went to Michigan State. But there is a local watch company called Shinola, and I know that brand does not get a lot of good feelings outside of Michigan, and I think largely because for the court side of things, they get a lot of flack for charging a lot of money for court. Lake Michigan Monster. It's a 43 millimeter dive watch, beautiful blue dial, aluminum bezel. It's kind of chunky. It's probably 13, 14 millimeters. It's got a Salida inside, and it's a terrific watch. Like it is durable. It is built like a tank. You could probably drop this thing on the floor a few times, and it would still run flawlessly. And in fact, I have dropped it on the floor a couple times, and it's fine. But Sinola has done tie-ins with the University of Michigan and Michigan State. They do it in their Canfield line. I don't particularly like that style of watch, but I think they do a decent job of executing the tie-in. And then I've seen fashion brands that will do Detroit Red Wing tie-ins or Pistons tie-ins or Lions tie-ins. Timex does a terrific chronograph that my wife actually bought for me. She ended up getting me tickets to a Lions game last season to go see them play the Bears. And then she also gifted me this Timex with the Detroit Lions logo on the dial.
Oh,
So
nice.
it's a cool sort of a cream dial with a really nice leather strap, and so it's a chronograph, and I wore that to the game. So yes, there are licensing tie-ins. Yes, I think brands know that people in Michigan and in the surrounding areas are diehards regarding their sports teams. So I think that's well explored, at least in Michigan.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, and in your defense, the greatest point guard in the history of basketball came from Michigan State, and I'll,
That's
I'll
true.
stand, I'll stand on that hill and I'll die on that hill. And then,
You and I agree there.
yeah, yeah, and then, I also feel like, the funny Detroit Lions story. I went to a Lions Washington professional football, whatever they're called now, years ago when my son was little, and Charles Johnson, the tallest football player I've ever seen in my life. It's a memory. Every time anyone talks about the Lions, it's the first memory in my head that Charles Johnson was so freakishly taller than everybody else. I it was, and he was so much faster. It was insane. I'm like, this guy's got to be from another planet. And and then I also remember that's when you guys had Ndamukong Suh. I think he was like a second year guy at
He
the
was a
time.
terrific player.
Oh, and all I could think of is that guy wanted to beat me up. I'd have a real problem in life. Like he was just so big, and it was crazy. But and you guys have great uniforms. I'm gonna tell you right now, the Lions, one of the best uniforms in football history. and it makes me happy whenever they're slightly good because I feel like that uniform needs to have a good center stage. I'm a uniform guy, so but interesting stuff. Let's see. All right, so let's get into the meat and potato of this. You probably have one of the more extensive collections I've had with someone on as a guest, and I wanted to donate, as much or dedicate as much time as I could to your collection because there's some beautiful pieces, and we've talked a little bit, and there's some cool stories behind them. So let's just run through some of your favorite pieces. Feel free to go through them any order you want to. We have an order because we do an agenda, but like I said, whatever your heart feels like doing. Let's get into them, and the show is yours now, Rich.
Sure. So before I get into that, I do want to say for people who have not read your blog, who haven't looked at all your videos, you are an incredibly valuable voice in the watch collecting community because you are not connected to any brands. You're not selling watches. You don't have a store. You're in this for the true passion about the hobby. And I think in a sea of people, in a sea of Instagram accounts or YouTube accounts that this is their main career, I think yours stands out shoulders above them because of what motivates you and where this is coming from. So I appreciate your videos. I appreciate writing. I think it's all great.
Oh, thanks, Rich.
So that said, I'll sort of get started where I started, and that was the first watch that really drew me in that I owned. So I have this one here. It's a Citizen analog digital world time watch, and it's got sort of a gold bezel, and you can see it has digital readouts that unfortunately don't work. But this one I got as a gift from my parents in high school, and I was just sort of taken by a watch that gave you the ability to tell time in like 24 time zones all over the world. I didn't know how that was possible, and I thought it was
Yeah.
sort of magical. And this one drew me in even further. I think I wore this watch as a daily for probably 3 or 4 years, and it made the appreciation for watches run even deeper. So I didn't want to go much further without mentioning that one.
No, that's an awesome
And
piece.
that
I have a buddy of mine who has America's Cup version that he got when he graduated boot camp in 2003. I think it was 2003. And the thing still runs. It's beat up, but those Citizen Annie Digis from back in the day, man, absolute workhorses. Wonderful first piece to start with.
right, I grew up. Most people grew up with Seikos, sort of getting those and idolizing those. I never did for some reason. I always grew up looking at Citizen watches. So like the Citizen Blue Angels Skyhawk or the the Nighthawk, that one. Those were always watches that I absolutely loved as a kid. I just thought the analog digital combination was so cool.
Yeah, very much so. It is, especially I think when you're young, right? You're like, ooh, this is pretty snazzy. Yeah,
Right, and then like everybody else, I had the Timex Ironman watches, and those were companions in seventh and eighth grade. Anything physical, I would have that thing on my wrist, and I just loved, the iron. I'd never done an Ironman, but just the sort of the symbology of Ironman was this watch is tough. No matter
yeah,
what you put it through, it's going to work, and that sort of guided the way I've collected watches throughout my watch collecting career. I've always emphasized durability and toughness over high-end complications or dress watches or anything else. So that's why even today, 20, 30 years later, my watch collection is mostly dive watches, mostly sports watches.
yeah. No, and there's something to be said about that too. And we've had a discussion. Me and you have had the discussion about build quality, and I think that's an underlying conversation with. And I don't think some people even know they're really having it. When they talk about design, sometimes the functionality and the ability to take damage is part of the design element, right? Like we were talking about the FXD earlier. I mean, that's clearly meant to not be in a safe.
Right,
It is designed. And then if you look at some of your other pieces we're going to talk about later that you have, they're very nice pieces, but you can do stuff in them. They're not pretty for pretty sakes. They're beautiful, but they're also able to take a pounding if they need to take a pounding. And I think
right,
that is harder to combine than people think when it comes to watch design. I think it's much more difficult to do because it's not cheap to do. It's not
right.
inexpensive for the manufacturer to do. Even if they streamline their processes, it's still raw material and all that stuff. But yeah, very good point.
Yeah, there's a great quote from Jason Heaton from the Great Ado where you and I sort of connected, and he has a couple of long pans, and I think he was asked questions about what do you use these watches for, and his approach towards watch collecting I really like, and his is if you pay more, you should expect more. So the fact that you have a high-end dive watch should not mean you baby that dive watch. It should mean you beat it up because you should be able to expect more out of that watch. This is a very personal view, but one of the things I would never do is get a high-end watch and then put filters or films on the clasp or on the crystal to make sure they don't get damaged. My approach to watch collecting is I'm doing something wrong if this watch doesn't show battle scars by the time it gets to my son. My view is every scar tells a story. Every dent and ding tells a story. And my son will get all my watches someday. My stepson will get some too. Uh, but I want those boys to look at that watch and say, God, I wonder what Dad did to put this scratch on the side of the case.
Yeah.
And I would not want to hand somebody over a pristine watch that looked like I never wore it. So with that, I'll segue sort of into my heavy hitter piece, which is the Blancpain 50 Fathoms.
So
So this is a 45 millimeter, I think it's about 13 and a half, 14 millimeters tall, watch from 2013. So this is the stainless steel version. And this is, I think if I had a fire in the house and I could only grab one watch, this would be the watch that I would grab. So this is one that I tried on a number of times in the boutique and elsewhere, probably 5, 6 years ago. And I thought to myself, God, this is a gorgeous watch. I would love to have this someday. This would be the best watch I could ever own. But I don't think I'll ever be able to afford it. I can't imagine walking to an authorized dealer and plunking down $15,500 to get one of these watches. So the way I was able to get this one is during the pandemic, Rolexes, as you know, took a
yeah.
gigantic. I had an Explorer 2 from 2012 that I liked but did not love, and that one I got used from a dealer prior to all the madness in COVID. So I got it at a pretty reasonable price. I liked it but didn't love it. The dimensions for me of the indicators on the dial and the dial itself just didn't work quite as well as I wanted it to, and I thought there's got to be a way for me to harness this and maybe put it into a Blancpain. And I came across a dealer based out of Nashville. He has a website, and on the website was this watch. And
Mm.
the watch came with box and papers. It came with the bracelet, everything you would want with it. So I just thought, you know what? I'm going to just email this guy and ask if he would be willing to do a trade straight up, my Explorer 2 for this Blancpain. And I figured, the Blancpain it's not a popular watch. I rarely see these in public, and maybe he'll think, you know what? I'll have a much easier time selling this Explorer 2 than I will this Blancpain. So within a few hours, he wrote back and said, sure, happy to do it. So I shipped my watch out to him first. And, there's always those nervous
Yeah.
moments where you're like, I just sent a $10,000 watch to a guy I don't know and have no way
Yeah.
to sort of control if he walks out with that thing. But I got mine the following day. And this is June of 22
Hmm.
that I received the Blancpain, and I was over the moon with this watch. It exceeded every expectation I had. It was on my wrist for 3 months straight. So it's in really good shape. It's got a little bit of scuffing on the side of the case from where the bracelet was taken on and off. The only negative is the bracelet's a little too tight for me. I could wear it, but then again, I think this 50 Fathoms belongs on the sailcloth strap. I think that's where it looks best. That's where it wears best. Blancpain also offers some really cool NATOs, and I've got one of those, so I'll usually put it on that one in the summer. But this was a Grail watch before I got it, and it remains a Grail watch now. It's
Yeah.
one of the best in my collection. And when I've got to go into the courtroom, uh, I know people say you shouldn't be wearing dive watches with suits, but this thing goes on my wrist just about every time. It's just got a tremendous amount of presence, and it's a favorite in my collection with good reason.
No, it's a beautiful piece, and it's I just love its tied to legacy too. And I know there's some arguments back and forth between Rolex people, Blancpain, and even Zodiac about the first commercial, dive watch. Those people can go punch each other in the face somewhere else. But it's a it's a beautiful piece. And you know what, Rich? You should like write a paper on seizing the moment, because it's a cool story of understanding the market at that moment, right? Like you understood the market. You're like, this dude ain't selling this Blancpain anytime soon. People are losing their minds over Rolexes. I don't really dig this Rolex. And you
Right.
took your shot. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, which is a horrible but true statement, right?
Right.
We talk about, our sons in sports. Like, my son's a defender, central defender. I tell him, hey, look, just 3 or 4 times a match, look up and see if the keeper's off his line. He's got a cannon for a leg. And he has
Right.
scored probably like 5 goals from a little further than mid pitch over his career because he just looks up, and it's like,
Seizing the
like,
moment.
yeah, you don't want to do it 5 times a match, but maybe once every couple of matches, your coach isn't going to yell at you too much. But that's a beautiful
Right.
piece. And hey, the good thing is if you had to run back in and save it in a fire, you'd probably have the neckton on, so you'd come out with 2 pieces. So
That's
you
right.
got
Yeah, the necktine's not going anywhere.
you got that going for you. So what else do we got in the lineup?
So next one is one I don't have with me, but I will tell a little bit about the story because I think it's interesting. So back in 2015, I my buying cadence before COVID was once a year, come end of the year or bonus time, I would go and one particular shop in Michigan and I would look for watches and I would buy one watch a year and I would wear that for most of the year. So one year was a Christopher Ward Trident that's now in one of our buddies' hands, getting a second life.
Yes.
Another year it was a Panerai Luminor base model, and then I decided in 2015, I had a cousin who was a few years older than me, and he was really successful, and he had a Rolex Submariner on, and I loved that watch at the time. I thought if there's ever a chance I could own a Rolex, it would be that one. But again, for many years, I thought there's no way I would ever be able to afford a Rolex. So 2015 comes around, and I was in a position to be able to get that Submariner. So I took my son, who was 3 at the time, and we went to the dealer, and it was a completely different world than it is now because the cases were full and I spent 30 minutes trying to decide between a Submariner date and a Submariner no date. I also looked pretty heavily at the Tudor North flag and then ultimately got the Rolex. So I got the Submariner, and at the time you could negotiate discounts on Rolexes. So I walked out with a pretty healthy discount too, and I've had that watch for nearly 10 years now. It wears great. It's iconic. Uh, there's nothing wrong with that watch. It's a great example of craftsmanship by Rolex. That said, between the 50 Fathoms and the Rolex, the 50 Fathoms gets way more time. I think it's
Yeah.
visually a more appealing watch. I think it's a more unique watch, and it just feels better on the wrist. Uh, for those of you who are trying to decide between the two, put the Blancpain 50 Fathoms on. I think you might love it.
Oh yeah. No, it's and for everyone like I said, watching right now, and I'm gonna have all the pictures and article on the blog so you can take your time looking at them. And there is it's I've read all kinds of articles back and forth about the 50 fathoms and the submariner and similarities and blah 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 blah. And there is something to me visually about the 50 fathoms use of negative space in the design element that strikes me as appealing. It's a good use of negative. It's not too wordy. And I'm a big font guy. Like the script, the way 50 Fathoms is written, it's just, yeah, you know what I mean? Like there's this, it's, it's, and they both have their shiny reflective elements, but then there's something about the Blancpains. It's just, it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain, but I get what you mean. Yeah. But you got to have one. You got to have a submariner if you're going to get one. I could tell that story another time. Like my love of the Explorer 2 has waned into something else, and that's another story for another time. But yeah, nice piece, nice piece.
Thank you.
Which one next, Rich?
Next one up is another recent acquisition. So this is the Tudor FXD MN, Marine Nationale. So this is a 22 model, 42 millimeters titanium case, fixed bars, and a really cool engraving on the back that I'll show with the MN symbol
Yeah,
and the MN22. So the fixed lugs are great design, uh, super strong, super durable. This one was sort of a call out because I used to have the Pelagos 42, the blue one, with the titanium bracelet, the
Mhm.
ingenious clasp that they designed, and I'll get into the story a little bit later about why that one left the collection. But back when it did, I always thought there is a day when I'm going to come back to the Pelagos. I will get a new one, and it might be the FXD. So when this watch first came out, I wasn't a big fan of it. I thought, they've degraded the water resistance from 500 meters to 200. They've got fixed lugs. It's not going to be able to take a bracelet, so it limits the appeal of the watch. Why would anybody ever get this? I will say I was wrong about that, and the reason I found out I was wrong is I tried it on. So I went to a jeweler in New York and got this thing on the wrist, and compared to the Pelagos 42, which is quite a bit thicker, this thing wears like a dream. It wears really flat on the wrist. It's got a beautiful matte bezel that doesn't have a lot of reflective surfaces. And this thing just screams cool watch. This watch screams, beat me up. I can take whatever you throw at me. And that's something I really value in a watch. So I tried it on. I fell in love with this thing, and then I had the opportunity to pick it up from. And by the way, I buy most of my watches used. I don't typically pay retail. I don't. Although I think the retail experience for some is important, it's not for me. I'd rather get a better
Yeah.
deal. So this one I got used. It's terrific. I didn't realize how much I would like it when I first got the watch. When I bought it, I thought this was going to be a good situational watch for going on workouts, going on runs, going to the beach, working with it, just beating it up. It is so much more than that. It has seemingly an unlimited amount of ability to take different straps. And when I got this one, this was on my wrist all day long. I stopped wearing other watches for about 4 weeks straight. It's that good. So,
Yeah.
Jason, I can't wait until you get one. I think you'll get the Black Dial USN, but I know you will love it. Anybody that is curious about this watch, get it on the wrist. I think you're going to love it too.
Oh yeah. It's a wonderful piece, and all the design elements you talked about. I mean, from the practical, functional design elements to like some of the artistic design elements. That anchor on the back. Now, I'm partial to anchors. I'm partial to other anchors more than the Marine National anchor, but I always felt like that anchor is so cool. I wish it had been tastefully added to the dial. I just felt like um maybe replacing it. Maybe they do that for people actually in the Marine National. Maybe there's something they do where they replace the shield with that
Right.
anchor. I feel like that'd have been cool. Um, I just can't wait till Tudor puts the rose back on the dial because my loving Ranger, which is now gone to Mrs. WatchRolling, um, the rose on the crown is one of my favorite little elements. It's
Right.
just really nice little touch of class. But everyone I know that has
So,
the FXD loves it. So, yourself included.
and we know people that love it so much they've bought both versions. They've got the black one and they've got the blue one. And
Yeah.
I've asked every single one of them, which do you like better? And they can't give me a straight answer. They love them both.
Yeah, because look, they always say in soccer, football for my, European friends, life is you're either red or blue, right? You're either
Right.
Liverpool or Everton, you name the teams. Um, I think in watches you're either blue or black, you know, but those are the
Right.
two that you have. Like you have a black watch and you have a blue watch. And I think for the average person, the average enthusiast, like I have black. I actually found that out about myself the other day. I'm like, man, I got a lot of black dial watches, and I have my one blue samurai, and I have that's about it, and and then my new one I just got yesterday, but it's yeah, black or blues. That thing's awesome, man, and I love your pictures with it because it always looks like comfortable. Like it's hard to explain. Just it's really nice.
It's one of the easiest watches to photograph. The Blancpain has a lot of reflection going on with the crystal. The Tudor does not because of the matte bezel and the matte dial. It's really easy to photograph.
Yeah, the matte
And
stuff's nice, man.
and the way Tudor, I don't know if you recall how Tudor handled the release of the black dialed FXD. There was a lot of callbacks in the marketing materials to the Tudor Submariner, and I think most people assume, well, this is it. They're releasing the Tudor Submariner. No,
Yeah,
this is the black FXD. But my interpretation of that message is Tudor saying the FXD is the evolution of the Tudor Submariner. This is your modern Tudor Submariner. You will never get a watch called Submariner because that's a Rolex thing, but this is what you're getting. And I think I think it's a brilliant message to put out about this watch. To me, it's everything that watch back from the 60s and 70s was supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty ingenious way to do it too, because when you talk about practical uses of this thing, right? Like, I mean, eliminating the bracelet, even if you had a dive extension and all that stuff, eliminating the bracelet allows you to literally take any strap that's 20 millimeters wide and wrap this thing around whatever you want. You could wrap it to an underwater vehicle, pylon,
Right,
stanchion. You know what I mean? Like whatever you wanted to wrap it around, you could do that with that strap. And I think making something the modern interpretation is the right thing to do. Now, I'm all for it. Like if they wanted to release some Tudor submariners and sell them, I'm cool with that too. But like this looks like it's a modern version of what that old one used to do, right?
right,
I don't know how to explain it. It's like when you see newer version of cars and they do them right, not
right.
like we can talk about the Land Cruiser, but that's another podcast for another time. But like I don't see the big deal with the new Land Cruiser as much as some people do. I think it's a for the times more appropriate than the older one, even though you can still use the older one, if that makes any sense. But
Right. Makes perfect sense to me.
I
And
love
I'll get into this topic quickly right now. So, talking about the vintage Tudor Submariner versus this one, my approach to collecting is I need these watches to be durable. I don't need to worry about leakage, and I need to be able to beat them up. So for me, vintage offers me none of those things, and modern
yeah,
offers me all those things. So there are different views on this, and certainly people who prefer vintage are right too, but I would never choose a vintage version of a modern watch. I would always take that modern watch because everything is newer. I'm going to get more longevity out of it. And I'll get more
yeah.
durability. So Tudor Submariners from the 60s and 70s look fantastic. Those aluminum bezels are beautiful. I love the blue ones, but I would take the FXD any day of the week over those ones just because I would feel like I'd have to baby those, and that's not
Yeah.
consistent with how I appreciate watches.
No, you're exactly right. And it's funny because I noticed there's a lot more what I call, precious stuff with vintage enthusiast. You know what I mean? Like it's a protection of their piece. And understandably so. I mean, a lot of them are historically, super duper relevant and have all kinds of provenance and stuff. But like, let's be honest, you're not going to put your pogue on and go out and, go rock climbing. You're just not going to do
Right,
it. And,
right,
and it's kind of along the lines like you use your timepieces, and it's kind of funny when you brought up like earlier about passing on to your son the piece and it's going to be all scarred up. Like it sounds kind of morose or whatever you want to say, but I want that like when I'm old and I'm dead and I'm on that slab and they're doing the autopsy on me, I want that person to be like, yo, what did this guy do with his freaking life? Like, his shoulders reconstructed, his knees reconstructed, like I've been under the blade quite a bit and they're all from, either in the line of duty or just, well, mostly of them, and it's kind of like, but it's from taking those risks and doing those things and living life and, um, having a professional career that I'm proud of. And
right,
I think it all ties in right to those timepieces. Like, I know that hockey and et cetera, et cetera, you're not, I mean, whatever piece you want from 1976, you're not taking it out there to do that. You're just not.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I play hockey, I've whatever watch I've got on, if it's the FXD, it goes right into the hockey bag and it gets zipped up and it gets bounced around the hockey pads and the skates. I need a watch that's gonna handle that, not something that's gonna break. There's a collector on Instagram named Solid Caseback, and he has a terrific collection of
Great
Rolex
name.
and Tudor, just an amazing collection. But I would be deathly afraid of having that collection because there's so many vintage pieces that wouldn't fit with how I use and
Yeah.
abuse watches.
And then when do you wear them? I mean, that's the thing, Rich, like we've had these discussions, like, with this Planet Ocean. I have, I don't have a large collection, but I'm pretty proud of my collection. I feel like I've put a lot of thought into it and the stuff really speaks to me. But like, there's been times where I put like my Grand Seiko down, I put my Planet Ocean down and I go to work with the Planet Ocean, you know?
Right,
And it's like at a certain point, I got it. I got to give some of this stuff up because you can't wear them all the time. And so all these people have like these huge vintage collections. It's like you can't wear them. You literally can't wear them all the time, and then you can't wear them all the time based on what you're
Right.
doing. And so I
Right.
think that would be like more stressful for me. Like the Zenith I got, the vintage Zenith. Um, I can't wear it. My hand's too big. It's causing stress on the OEM bracelet, and because it's
Right.
integrated, and this thing is from 1975, I don't want to be the guy who destroys the bracelet for anyone else that could wear it. So the gentleman that sold it to me, I let him know, like, hey man, I'll hold on to it for like 3 to 6 months. Let me know when you're ready, and I'll, because he wanted first rights of refusal. And
Right.
so I believe in paying back the good, and it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart because I love that piece, but um I can't. I guess a lot of people didn't have hands like me in 1975. I guess so. It's kind of like, well, I've had wonderful experiences with vintage as far as enjoying the pieces from that time period, but I've had horrible experiences with my body structure and pieces from that time. They just
Right.
don't work, and it sucks. But I know exactly what you mean.
The
Exactly what you mean.
Submariner has a pretty big gouge taken out of the lower left lug, and I think it's because I slammed it into a door frame when I was walking through about 2 years ago. It's a noticeable dent, but I will never get that thing fixed. I don't want it filled in. I don't want Rolex to refinish the case when it goes in for a service. My son's going to look at this and say, "What the heck did my dad do to cause this?" That's part of the story.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna send my Planet Ocean in to get um finished because it's essentially mine and the scratches from it aren't mine. But I'm gonna tell them don't take the scratches off that link that Tom Place gave me because I want Tom scratches on that part of the link of the bracelet. So the
That's
rest of the
right.
bracelet will look great, and then there'll be these scratches, and I'll be like, "Oh, this is Tom's scratches from his motorcycle thing," because I think that's hilarious. Not the motorcycle accident, the scratches, not the motorcycle accident. But
Right.
so let's move on to your next piece, Rich. Want to let me let
It,
me preface this one. If we're doing it by order, this is a shout out to Cody from AWWC. This is one of Cody's favorite brands. If we're doing it in order,
but which one is it?
the Mark 10, Mark 20. Sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah, the Mark 20. So I got an IWC Mark 20 last year. That is I, I've noticed IWC. I've sort of been a off the radar fan of its watches, but I've never really felt compelled to buy one. I think the Angenieur is pretty cool. I don't like the pricing of the new one. That's not what I would pay for a watch. Uh, but I was in a boutique in New York and I tried on the Mark 20 for the first time, and it came with the bracelet, and it was phenomenal. It was a great watch. It was a great size. The blue dial is just beautiful, and the Mark 20 has really been upgraded from the past ones. So if you look at historical videos of where the Mark series came from, there were sort of two splits of IWC's watches. One was used by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force in World War II, and then the Mark series was originally designed for the British, both for soldiers and for pilots. So it has sort of a really unique combination of field watch and pilot watch. So the handset gives it that pilot watch feel, and then the dial sort of looks like a field watch if you compare it to like a Hamilton khaki field mechanical. It's got more of that bent to it. So I think it's a really cool melding of two different styles, and the evolution of the Mark series over the years. Uh, it came out with stick hands first, and then transitioned to pilot hands. So if you can watch videos on how that watch has changed over time, IWC has done a beautiful job of changing it incrementally to improve it, but also containing and continuing that consistent design all the way through. So the Mark 20 has 100 meters of water resistance. You can swim with it if you need to, snorkel with it. It's got 120-hour power reserve. It has a gorgeous blue sunburst dial, and then the case is just really incredibly finished. And they have a really cool strap exchange system where at the press of a button you can go from bracelet to leather strap and back again without ever taking the spring bars off. So it's easy to change.
Nice.
And then the bracelet itself, which I don't have yet, I will get it. The bracelet itself has a push button on the clasp that has micro adjust. So the clasp has the IWC logo on the bottom, And if you press that logo, you can do micro adjust on the fly while it's on your wrist.
Oh
And then
wow.
for
Yeah, I remember you
sizing the
showing me that.
bracelet, it's pretty cool. For sizing the bracelet, you can just take a toothpick and sort of press a button, and you can take links out without any tools. So IWC has really hit a home run with this watch. I think it's under the radar, but again, try it on. I think a lot of people out there will really like it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I've seen your pictures, and you know, honestly, because of Cody's affinity for IWC, I've done some homework on IWC, and it goes back to what you said earlier. When you pay a certain amount of money, you expect some things, and you can tell either by total chance they give you all these little, accoutrements, but practical ones,
Right,
or it's in development and it's planned. Like we're gonna innovate not for the sake of innovation. These are things that people find annoying. Let's make them not annoying. So when they buy our watch, they want to come buy another one because they're like, no, I can change links without having to set up my little tool studio. You know what I mean? Like, or damage the bracelet or anything else when they're trying to take the things out. Yeah. Because whoever invented the
right.
pin and collar system should be in prison. Like, that's all I'm going to say. Like, straight to
It's a
prison.
nightmare to change those.
Yeah. So,
And the Mark 20 looks equally great on a leather strap. It looks like a dress watch, but if you put a NATO on it, it's a great weekend watch too. And for me, a dress watch is the IWC Mark 20. It doesn't get any more dressy for me than that. So strong recommendation for that watch.
no, I know what you mean. And I feel like, hot take as adults, we should strive to, you know, look business professional when needed and then look great for the weekend too, right? Like, with some
Right.
subtle changes, we should be able to do both. I think that's pretty good. Um, all right, Mark. So we got sorry, Rich. We got a couple more pieces. We were talking about the Mark 20. What's your next one?
The next one is one I have with me, and this is the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical. So this
Nice.
is not an expensive watch. I got it through the Slack channel for a really good price. It's a 38 millimeter field watch, fully mechanical, so you wind it up. And I don't have a lot of mechanical watches, but I love the feeling of having to wind it in the morning. Maybe some people think it's an annoyance, but I think it's a point of connection with the watch to know that you're setting that movement in motion first thing that you do when you get out of the bed every day. The lugs on this one are fairly long, but it still wears nice and thin. Comes on a
Yeah.
really nice NATO strap. I think you have other strap options too, but this is one you can put on the wrist and it just disappears. It just does what it says on the tin, and it's sort of a nice historical piece that was issued way back when to our soldiers in World War II,
Yeah.
and another one that just makes me happy to put on the wrist.
Yeah. I mean, they're popular for a reason. And they
Right,
sell all the, I don't know about the entire khaki line, but there's always Hamiltons in the Navy Exchange and other PXs I've seen because the they're good watches and they last. And I like the contrast on them. I've always dug the contrast on them. Like I have, the older I've gotten, my eyes have gotten worse, but you look down at one, you know what time it is. Without, it's a little blurry, but you still know what time it is. You know what I mean? Without your
right.
glasses on. So it's pretty good. What else, Rich?
Next up on the list is the Tudor Black Bay 58 Navy. So I I liked the Black Bay when it initially came out. It was not something that was on my purchase list from the get-go. And that's another way that I try to approach collecting sensibly is like everybody else, I'm not immune to hype. I'm not immune to FOMO, and I'm not immune to Instagram where you see the same watch over and over again and the algorithm feeds it to you until you want it. So to combat that, the way I try to collect is sure, there are watches that I think I have to have when they first come out, but I usually tell myself, wait 6 months to a year after that watch has been released. Wait until the hype dies down a little bit, wait until prices are lower. And if you still want it, then it's probably a watch that you should try it and probably a watch you want. And I feel like that cuts down on mistakes that I might make where I buy the watch as soon as it comes out and then it falls flat, or the hype disappears and suddenly I don't like it as much as I thought I did. That waiting period, I think, does a lot to cut that down, for me
Yeah.
at least. So
No,
the
you're
58 is,
spot on.
go ahead.
Oh no, you're spot on with that.
And like I think it's impossible for someone to say hype doesn't affect me, FOMO doesn't affect me. If you're on Instagram and watching YouTube videos about watches, it probably does to some extent. So the 58 Navy is one that I got roughly 2 years after it released, and this is rare, but I did buy this one at retail on the fabric strap, and I love that watch. I wore it a ton. It was on my wrist for probably 4 weeks straight, and I had it for a year. And at the year mark, I I had just gotten rid of the Explorer 2, so I had the Rolex Samara in my collection and no other Rolex. And I've got a stepson named Mason, and I want to be able to be in a position where I have one Rolex going to my son Tommy, and then a second Rolex going to Mason. So I started looking around for something different. Most of the Rolex current lineup does not appeal to me. For me, it's just too much bling and too much glitz. So I found my taste as I've gotten older trending more towards neo vintage, like late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
So for me, the epitome of late 90s, early 2000s full watch Rolex was the Explorer, the 36 millimeter. So I was able to find a dealer with a 114270 36 millimeter Rolex. And that, in my view, was perfect for my collection, but also perfect for my stepson Mason because my son's a big guy. He's 12 and he's 135 pounds and he's 5'4". And then Mason is a little guy. He's thin, fast, small, and I figured the 36 millimeter will fit him perfectly. So I swapped the 58 Navy plus my Tudor Pelagos 42 for the Rolex Explorer 36 millimeter with no cash changing hands. If I were to do that deal today, that would
Yeah.
probably be a loser of a deal because the Rolex prices have gone down so much. But I got the watch; it was verified, and that 36 millimeter was on my wrist. It's a great watch. When I look down, I don't see glitz or glamour. I see tool watch, and I've now got two to give one to each son. Uh, but so the 58 Navy left my collection. And I had formed off the coast of Key West with my wife in that watch, and I had worn it all throughout that vacation. And I felt like I'd lost a piece of those memories when I let the watch go. So I resolved one day I was going to get that watch back. So fast forward about a year after that, my wife and I were visiting friends and family in Houston, and I was on the Watch Exchange on the Reddit subforum, and there happened to be a guy who was selling a Black Bay 58 Navy on bracelet, which I didn't have the first time around, for a really good price. So I messaged him and said, "Look, can I stop by and look at the watch?" And my wife, who's very understanding of my watch sickness, said, "Sure, let's go and let's look at buying another watch, I guess." So I met the guy. He happened to be another lawyer. We talked about what we did. I looked at the watch, Venmoed him the money, and walked away with that thing. And I am so happy to get that watch back in my collection. I wear it regularly. I think the size is great. I think that the tone of blue that's on the dial and the bezel is fantastic. And of all of the 58 versions, I think that's the best one, along with the 925. So to date, in my entire years of collecting since I was in high school, that's the only watch that I've sold and then bought back.
Yeah, I like Black Bay 58s. They're pretty cool. 925 is the one I would want. And
I think
I'm
that's a
glad you got
great
it back
choice.
though. And that is a cool blue. I've seen it in the metal. It's a great blue. I always like it when you're not getting like the standards, what I call standard, substandard blues.
Right.
Pretty nice. Well, let's run through the rest of them real quick, Rich, and then we'll get into some other topics. Um, any order you want to for the watches, because they're all pretty
Great.
cool.
So the next one is going to be the Manta SkyQuest GMT. So Manta is a brand that I discovered at Wind Up Watch Fair in New York, and those guys were great to talk to. You can tell they're really passionate about the watches. I had tried on the prior version of the SkyQuest, and it didn't quite speak to me in terms of the design. I didn't connect with it as well as I wanted to, but then they released a sportier version that came out in 2022, and the pop of the red on the bezel and the black on the bezel just hooked me. I had always wanted a late 90s, early 2000 Rolex GMT Master, the Coke version, but the prices of those are more than I'm willing to pay, and I think they'll stay that way. So I thought, let's check out this Manta SkyQuest GMT that's in the same colorway. I love the durability of the watch. I love the bracelet. It's super comfortable. It articulates really well. And I love the tone of the red and the black on the bezel. So that was an instant purchase for me. I bought it maybe a week after seeing it at the Wind Up Watch Fair. And I think there are in 99% of cases where you are buying a lesser priced watch to sort of substitute for that higher priced watch that you want, I think it's usually not going to be enough to satisfy that desire. But for this one, for whatever reason, that Manta SkyQuest has killed my desire to ever have that Rolex GMT Master, that Coke version. I am really happy with that watch. It's durable, it's terrific, and it yes, it's priced high for a quote micro brand. I think it's $2,200 or $2,300 now. But the level of quality from that watch, I would put it on par, if not slightly better than Oris and Longines, and not too far off of Tudor quality. It's that good, and the bracelet's that good.
Yeah, it's is that the one with the like the gold gild in the bezel? Is that the
So
one?
the prior version had gilt in the bezel. There is a Pepsi version of the watch
Okay.
that I have that does have gilt on the bezel. I think that looks really cool too.
And my point was is that it's one of those watches where normal photographs, like wrist shots, like just people taking pictures. I'm not saying like like professional photography pictures. It shows up really nice in regular pictures, like
Right.
wrist shots. It again, this thing looks really, really well made, and the finishings are good and all that stuff. So I think it's pretty cool. Nice pick. What's next?
Thank you. So the last one is going to be the Scurfa MS. Actually, two more.
Okay.
The second to last one is going to be the Scurfa MS-23. So Paul Scurfield is a commercial saturation diver from England, and his watches are talked about quite a bit on TGN by the two hosts of the show, and with good reason, because they are quartz-based divers that are 500-meter water resistant, titanium case, and they are the quality that he is able to achieve for a watch that I think is what, $350,
Yeah, it's
$400.
not
It's
much.
just off the charts. So I was able to get one of the MS-23s last year. They call it military spec, and I think the only difference is the bezel is fully graduated. So it's a blue dial, blue bezel, aluminum, really beautifully done. And then he also sells a matching titanium bracelet that, in my view, turns that watch into a really good alternative at a much lower price to a Pelagos 39. It's durable, it's tough. There's a little bit of doming to the crystal on the watch, which makes viewing from offset angles more difficult. But otherwise, it's a terrific watch that I can't believe the quality for the price that you pay for it.
Yeah, my buddy has a Scurfa, the yellow dial one. He's an active duty um officer in the Navy still, and he
Right.
dives and all that stuff, and he loves that watch. Really loves it. He actually wrote a review of it on my blog, so shout out to you. Great watch, great company. Paul's. I mean, we talked a little bit, like short messages. But seems like a really nice guy. All right, and your last one, Rich.
Last one is one that you inspired me to get, and that's the Zodiac Super Seawolf Skin
Oh,
Diver
nice.
53. So you had written just a terrific article for a blog to watch, and I had always been curious about Zodiac and stumbled on that article, and I thought, God, this guy is really able to convey how much passion and like he has for that watch. It's got to be really something special to evoke all those sentiments. And so I had a chance to look at one of their watches here in Michigan at a boutique, and it's a terrific skin diver. It's nice and thin, feels really light on the wrist, and again, tons of quality for what you're getting. It's got a great rubber strap, and it looks great on NATO. So I have that watch in my collection, and I wanted to get it in addition to because you had articulated how good of a watch it is so well, but also because the first three sort of commercial skin divers or dive watches were the Blancpain, the Rolex Submariner, and then of course the Zodiac Super Seawolf. So I wanted to complete that sort of trifecta in my collection, and it's really cool to have all three of those watches.
Yeah, it's and I like your version too because I think a lot of people associate Zodiac with color, but I think if you dive a little deeper, no pun intended, into their overall catalog, they do a really good job with restraint of over color. Because the
Right,
one you have, the black with the orange, and then mine's that Hodinky collab, which the dial has to be seen in person to be believed. But you put them both on a bracelet, and you can wear them out for a night on the town in a collared shirt if you wanted to, in a jacket, and they'd be right at
right.
home. That thing classes up so much on the bracelet. It's insane, but it's just so fun in the strap because if we sit down and have dinner one day, I will make sure that I bring that so you can see it, because I've tried and I've gotten some decent shots recently with my new camera setup, but that dial's insane. It's
Right.
just a beautiful piece. But anyways, yeah, well, I'm glad you like it. And it doesn't it wear so much, like you almost don't know it's there.
It disappears on the wrist just
And
because
it's
of how thin
stainless
it is.
steel. Yeah, and you
Yep.
don't even, like, sometimes I have to look down. I'm like, oh yeah, I do have a watch on, like, in a good way. It just doesn't get in the way at all. It's wonderful.
And for
Okay.
those who are wondering, yes, I do dive with these watches. They don't just get nicked up on a desk. I've taken them all scuba diving and snorkeling.
Yeah, I'm actually looking into getting my dive qual. Said screw it, might as well. I mean, I wore a self-contained breathing apparatus for 2 decades. I could probably handle wearing a um, you know, scuba apparatus, which is slightly different. But anyways, um,
Absolutely.
so one of my favorite questions to ask people are their Grail timepiece. So Rich, let's just get into it because this one's pretty cool.
Good question. So the Blanc pen is still a grail for me. Yes, I have it, but it still remains a grail, and I still feel that way. Cody and I were talking about this. There are watches where you just sort of stare at the dial and realize sort of how fortunate you are to have that watch. And for me, it's the 50 fathoms, and of course the Necton. There is no end to the amount of time that I will look at the Necton and not think, God, this is a beautifully designed watch, and I'm really lucky to have this thing. But in terms of future grails, Vacheron, the Overseas, has always been a model that I've really liked. I've tried one on before, and there are watches when I try them on, at least, that I instantly connect with and that really make me happy and put a smile on my face. And the Overseas is one of those. For me, I think the current generation is a little too much bling, and of course, it's super expensive too. So the Grail watch would be the Vacheron Constantin Overseas Generation 2. So this one came out, I think, in the mid 2000s, and it's a little less glitz, a little more affordable. So maybe one day I'll be able to afford one of those. We'll see.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, like, my ultimate Grail would be the Vacheron Constantin Overseas Everest dual time.
That one is amazing. That one is incredible.
That thing's beautiful. Yeah. No, and but yeah, good pick. All right. So,
I will say a quick story. I went to the
yeah.
Vacheron Constantin boutique in NYC, and they had one of those. And I asked if I could try it on, and the answer was a very polite no. It was basically, you can look at it, but we're not taking this out for you to try on.
Really, sorry about that. Yeah. It's man, it's just it's that blue gray. Um, I don't know. Like, I joke around. Maybe being at on ships for 20 years, you've been in places where, like, the sky turns into the ocean and the ocean turns into the sky, and you get these interesting colors and variations of blue and gray. And I've always had my brain remembers what I see, and
Right.
and I kind of search for that now. You know what I mean? It's interesting. But that, to me, that Overseas Everest 2, just dual time, both of them actually. Just the color scheme kind of captures that, and then a little bit of orange. But anyways, we're not here to talk about my love of the Overseas Everest. So my favorite topic is either hot take or unpopular opinion. Sometimes if a person runs a business, I like to do pet peeves. Um, but I try not to do that with people who actually, um, like, I feel like it would be bad to ask an attorney their pet peeve of their client. So we'll leave that one out. Um, but your unpopular opinion. Give us some of your unpopular opinions and about wristwatches or watch culture in general.
So I've got a couple. Number one, despite the fact that I've talked about this brand, I think Rolex takes up too much airspace. I think the brand is too dominant in terms of how much discussion they occupy in the watch world. And I don't think it's unjustified, but it blocks out discussion and appreciation of more brands and more great watches. And I collect my own way, and I respect how other collectors want to collect their way too. So if you want a Rolex, if that's your goal in life, that's great. More power to you. I think you should follow your heart and do what makes you happy. But it's sort of sad to look on message boards and forums and see people talking about getting the call, and all of their energy is focused on the buying experience, and it's not a particularly good buying experience either. And I think what's lost is the appreciation of the watch itself and the appreciation of other brands as a result of all this focus on Rolex. And I think in the circles that you and I swim in terms of the TGN Slack channel, I don't think those folks are affected by that at all. I think there is a really broad appreciation of watches and brands. But I think for newer collectors who were sort of sucked into this vortex of needing to get a Rolex, I think they're missing out on the experience as a result of this magnetism that the brand has.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because obviously there's people that want to get this phone call, but my experience through other people, obviously, is that a lot of people are getting this call for a pre-owned watch, right? And a lot of the more experienced collectors are foregoing any kind of experience, quote unquote, just to
Right,
get their hands on the piece they want. And it's usually been owned by someone else. And then they have that moment by themselves. They're not really, I have buddies of mine who have worked towards that, the Rolex pieces they want. And to me, it seems like it was less about Rolex and more about them understanding what Rolex is capable of, what Rolex brings to the table, blah, 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 blah. And,
right,
and not so much going in and having the experience, quote unquote. It seems like a lot of people that want the experience of buying the Rolex are not super watch enthusiasts or just like Rolex enthusiasts, which again is
right,
no big deal. I mean, like I know when I get my Rolex, it's probably going to get mailed to me, you know, from somewhere, and it's probably owned by someone else. You know what I mean? Like, and I'll be
right,
fine with that, because to me, it's about what that piece, the more I've really tried to make my collection about commensurate with my level of knowledge about what I know about horology and watch enthusiasm in general.
right,
And I'm getting to that point, right? I'm getting to that point to where my collection really, when I pick them up, I understand them in and out and how that relates to me, because they are just a snapshot of me and me in general, not just my enthusiasm, but me in general. But do you think that they take up all this airspace because they're the ones that actually have figured out, to quote one of my fellow coworkers, Rolex just lines up dump trucks of money for marketing and advertising. I mean, it's obvious they do. I mean, it's been chronicled, but
right.
like, do you think that these other, I just don't understand, like Omega, right? Swatch Group. Like, I find it hard to believe that Swatch Group doesn't have the money to invest in a marketing strategy like Rolex does. Like,
I think you're exactly right. I think they have the money, but I think Rolex they've been expert level achievers in terms of positioning themselves as equivalent with success. Buying a Rolex equates to success in the
yeah,
same way that De Beers or other companies have been able to demonstrate or put into the cultural zeitgeist. If you're going to show diamond is equated to
yeah,
marriage, and Rolex is equivalent to success, and they've been terrifically successful at that marketing pitch. I think the Omega Necton, I would put that up against a Submariner any day of the week, and my Necton wins every day of the week because I wear it way more than I touch that Submariner. I think it's a better looking watch. I think it's mechanically a better watch, but it doesn't have the same cachet that Rolex does. It is not, Omega has not had that level of marketing success. And I think
yeah,
I was discussing this with a couple of my watch buddies from New York when the watch report was released. I think Morgan Stanley does it where they release watch sales by number and watch sales by unit. And Rolex is killing everybody else. And the question that folks were raising was, uh, do you think that's unassailable? Will Rolex always be in the top position? And I think the answer is no. Everybody's infallible. Everybody is subject to going off the boil, and Rolex is too.
yeah, yeah. I read. Have you had a chance to read the book, "Selling the Crown"?
Not yet, but that's on my list to read. It sounds
Okay.
really fascinating.
After this, give me a mailing address. I'll mail it to you. I already read it. I have a copy laying around here, and I'll shoot it to you so you don't got to spend. It's a good book. I feel bad that I forgot the author's name, but It's a good book, and it's a lot of interesting insight into Rolex. And I think I think they just did what you did on a macro level, where you realized that you weren't going to get a better price for your Explorer 2 to get this Blancpain. And at that time, they did the same thing with like selling their brand. They were like, no one else
Right.
around is doing this, and they seized the moment. Which hats off to them, because you know my one of my grails is a Rolex, and I'm not shy about it. It's pretty cool stuff. So, what do you think, Rich, that enthusiasts often overlook or misunderstand when it comes to collecting timepieces or watch enthusiasm in general?
So there's one quote that I heard from Tim Masso in one of his Watch Talk or Watchbox Studios videos, and I hadn't thought about this before, but he's totally right. The researching and the searching and the becoming knowledgeable about the watch that you want, it's not just crucial, it's part of the ownership experience. So buying the brand new hype watch that comes out robs you of all that experience of becoming knowledgeable about the watch, understanding the history, understanding the pros and cons of the watch. I think that needs to be part of the ownership experience, because the waiting and the researching makes that ownership more worthwhile. And I think another point that he made is, if you really want to become knowledgeable about a watch and make sure you're buying it for the right reasons, put aside the YouTube videos and put aside the short form journalism and look at long form. Monochrome does some good long form articles. A blog to watch does too. Your blogs are good long form discussions of watches, and I think that should be a better focus or a bigger focus when we're buying watches.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's part of the reason why. It's part of the reason how I ended up with this Planet Ocean, right? Because one of the watches you had listed that we didn't talk about was the Grand Seiko, the SPGN 0027,
27.
which I owned for a while and I loved it. But I knew I had something. I knew I didn't need a GMT, and I don't want one. And it, maybe not now. I don't want one right now. And having one sitting around not being worn is a waste. And opportunity presented itself. Was able to move it to a loving home, and I thought for a second, I'm like, you know what? Like, it was along the lines of Rolex, like this whole conversation where it was like, I mean, people know about Omega, but watch
Right,
enthusiasts know about Omega.
right,
People don't know about Omega. So I started doing my deep dive, right? Like I already knew about the brand and the piece I would always want. But I was like, let me go out there and look at the quote unquote market. And by the market, I meant eBay, because I feel like eBay is a microcosm of the rest of the watch market. Like, I guess you can go to Chrono 24, but I feel like eBay is like, they allow more information to be put per listing. And I feel like
right.
you get a better gauge of sellers, organically through their rating system or whatever. And I was like, let me go look at the older Planet Oceans, because I knew I wanted. So in my brain initially, because of my knowledge, I'm like, there's no way the 2500 Planet Oceans, Charlie 2500 Charlies are affordable, quote unquote. And when I pull up that eBay page, I'm like, what? I'm like, what? There's no way. And so, I know the game. I put it on my watch list because I know what's going to happen. If this company wants to move this watch, and I click watch list, give
Right.
them 24 hours. 24 hours, you have an offer from the seller. And I was like, looked at the offer, 10% off. Yes, please. That's more than that's more than gracious. That's more than, and I get the Planet Ocean with the coaxial escapement in it, all that history. I got the freaking George Daniels book back here that I perused to, refresh my knowledge. And
Right.
and all because I did more than look at YouTube videos, which I do. I'm not gonna lie. But I did a little reading, I did this and I did that. I really immersed myself in it. I got the Planet Ocean that I wanted. And every time, like, you look at your Necton or your Blancpain, every single time, I know that it's a powerhouse. This thing's a freaking powerhouse. And I love that piece just as much as my Grand Seiko the SBG X335, which has emotional ties with my wife,
Right.
because I did my research on that piece too. And now I'm like at, you saw my article. There's three pieces. There's three that are never going to go anywhere. And that's because the collecting is about what makes you happy. And I know for me, knowledge makes me happy and understanding makes me happy. And devoting and like you said, exercising a little bit of patience helped me get to that point. So I think you're dead on that it's a personal hobby. And however you feel about it is right because it's you. And I'll
Absolutely.
leave it with that. Like that this one little segment. It's your money. Like, it's your money. Like buy what makes you happy. And you know, if you rely too much on what other people say, you might not be as happy as you think in the end because it's not about you're not making it about you and what you want. You're making it about what other people think. And
Absolutely.
we're all different people. Okay. So another fun topic that I like to do is a guest picks a topic. So this is basically where the guest gets to take over the show. I like to let the guest do most of the talking anyways, but let's hear what you got to say, Rich.
All right. So I want to talk first about watch pricing. Uh, Fratello did an article or a series about this a few weeks back. I think it was a podcast and an article. And it seems like there is a lot of pricing that is exceeding the $10,000 threshold these days for new watches. And I'm sure what the Swiss are doing is they're looking at the number of watches purchased year after year, and they're seeing declines, especially after COVID is over. And I think strategically, it makes sense for them to increase the price of each watch sold to offset the lesser numbers of watches being sold. But as a collector and an enthusiast, I have sort of a line in the sand beyond which I will not buy a watch. And two brands that have really irked me about that are JLC and IWC. So IWC re-released the Angenieur, and I believe the titanium version of that watch, which is really good looking, it's a $13,000 or $14,000 watch. And to me, that is never a price that I would pay for a new watch, no matter what that watch is, Grail or not. And then JLC, I'd had a kind of a fondness for the Reverso and for the Polaris, but those prices have been hiked 30-40%. And those are price increases that are well beyond inflation. Obviously, none of us are getting raises of 30-40% in our salaries. And I sort of have a bias against companies that are going to hike prices that much. For me, not only will I won't continue looking at those watches, I'm probably not going to walk into that section of the dealership anymore to look at that entire brand. I'm a guy that will always shop used first over retail, but I don't think collectors are being treated fairly when price increases skyrocket to that level.
Yeah. No, I agree. Especially I get intellectual property and all that stuff, but especially when there's not any context given to why the prices are increased.
Right,
I
and
deal
no
with pretty big
mechanical improvements.
yeah. I deal with pretty big budgets and like I went car shopping about a year ago and they were like, "Well, it's the market adjustment." I'm like, "That's fake. That's fake money, man. That's a fake number. You can't
Right,
quantify that for me. And just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean it's real." You know?
right,
I'm like, I'm not going to walk out here and have my car depreciate 150% when I leave. It's a lot. It's not going to happen. You can't tell
right,
me, you can't prove to me the car's worth anymore. And it's bad. It's insulting. And that's the worst part. Like, I don't care what your professional background is. Most of us have jobs. Most of us have to balance our budgets. Most of us have to make life choices centered around money, right? So most of us have a pretty good idea about the value of a dollar and how it stretches. And when you show up in your gallon of milk that was $2.50 before is now $2 and, you know, 25 cents, but maybe you don't ask so many questions. But when you show up in the gallon
right.
of milk's $5, we're asking we're asking really serious questions, right? It's like and I think that's when you can tell there's a disconnect between the people that run the brand
Right.
and the people that communicate what the brand's doing to their audience. It's because I saw that engineer and I thought, man, that's awesome. And then I saw the price, I was like, what? I don't
Right.
understand. I don't understand at all.
It,
But
If you look at Grand Seiko, they've released some beautiful watches, and they have not increased prices to that extent. Is it coming? Who knows? But I've not seen any watch in their catalog get a 30 to 40% hike. And when I go into that brand, that authorized dealer, I see a lack of price increases, and I'm treated very well. And to me, that's the basis of a good relationship with a brand. When I pop into IWC or JLC and I see those price increases, I no longer feel like the brand wants a relationship with me as an enthusiast. I think it wants to extract as much money as possible as it can from me, and that is a big turnoff for me as a collector.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes they don't realize, and I don't know how they don't realize who it is that's buying their watches
Right,
and for how long. Like if you're not collecting data on this stuff, like the former data scientist in me, if you're not collecting data on who it is that purchases your watches, you are quote unquote messing up because you have to understand the demographic in order to understand how to sell your stuff. You know,
right,
just because you raise prices doesn't mean the people who are buying more expensive timepieces are going to come over and get your timepiece. You know what I mean? Like how much of your timepieces align with, let's just say align horizontally with those pieces that cost, 30% more than your watch. Maybe
right,
nothing. The quality may not line up, the materials may not line up, the movements may not line up, what they're capable of. All that stuff, it doesn't line up. So now you're charging 30, 40% more, hoping to draw that audience from that other price range. And they're going to look at your watch and laugh. Like, no, I'm not going to get that. Right. Like,
right.
kind of thing. Maybe it does work out. I don't know. But,
For me, when I turn away from brands like JLC and IWC, I look for other brands, and I look at Manta, I look at Vertex. I think Vertex does, your Vertex M100 is just a killer watch, especially for the price. The Aqualion is fantastic. I think that's a great dive watch that can be just as good as a Tudor, if not a little bit better in some cases.
please don't say
And
that
I
because
hope
it's been bouncing around my brain the last couple of months. Yeah.
you get the FXD first, then come back for the
Yeah.
Aqualion.
Yeah. But you're right.
But I,
And it's, yeah.
but I think that these brands may start to lose a little bit of market share, and hopefully brands like Vertex pick those shares up, or at least some of those collectors, because they're
Yeah.
offering a lot of watch for a fair price.
Yeah. And think about it. I mean, you see the watch market reports that you put out, like you mentioned earlier. It's not like their piece of the pie is that huge anyways.
Right,
So it's really like killing your golden goose. Like it's seriously like it's not like your Rolex and you're getting four, six pieces of the freaking eight pie, piece pie. You're
right.
it doesn't anyways, it doesn't make any sense, but I hear what you say. Because and this leads to one of your other topics though. I mean, you just mentioned it. You said Manta and brands like Vertex. You want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. So I think the microbrand space is great for collectors. I think there's a sweet spot between buying too many microbrands and not having enough attention focused on microbrands, because one of the mistakes I've made as a collector years ago is not being able to afford that piece I really want, and telling myself, well, I don't have the $3,000 or $4,000 that I need to get this watch, but I'll get a micro brand, and I'll buy that, and that will sort of tide me over for a little bit. And then I buy two more micro brands, and then maybe I buy a fourth micro brand in a 12-month period or a 16-month period. And then before I know it, I've spent $3,000 or $4,000 on micro brands or close to it, where I could have
Yeah.
had that one piece I really wanted. That said, I think there is a lack of innovation among the big brands. I think right now we're stuck in a period where they are intently focused on historical timepieces in their back catalog. And I think that's good up to a certain point. But beyond that, you can only go to that back catalog so often before there starts to be a little bit of a staleness to the brand and a lack of innovation. And I think that's where microbrands come in, because they have a lot more freedom of design. They have a lot more unique approaches to watches. Uh, they can do it at a lower cost, and they can act really quickly because they don't have the gigantic administrative and mechanism that takes a long time to turn around. So I think a lot of good bargains can be had in the microbrand space. And two, I'll mention right now, RZE just released a few days ago, or maybe even yesterday, titanium GMT with a really cool black dial, sort of a textured dial. really nice white hands, and a yellow GMT hand, all titanium for under $1,000. And that looks like a really nice watch. One lesser known brand that I like in the micro brand space is EC Anderson. So he does a lot of unique watches as well. And the one I have is called the Poseidon. And I don't think it's for sale any longer, but it looks sort of like a Blancpain Bathyscaphe. It's got a GMT bezel and a diver bezel built into one, ceramic. It's got
Hmm.
a black lacquer dial, power reserve indicator on the dial, and then it has what looks to be a circular moisture indicator that is orange and white. It's not a moisture indicator, it's a compass. And on the back of the watch, you've got instructions on how to use that compass and orient yourself. And it's 120 meters water resistant, all for under $1,000, and it's a really great value. One that I'll also call out for, it's not a micro brand, but Tissot's PRX, for the money that you pay for an automatic watch, is just fantastic. It's a beautiful dial. It's got a great bracelet. That's another area where I would look at if you're new to collecting, or if you
Yeah.
don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money on a watch.
Integrated stuff's fun. It's fun. I hear you. All right. So you had one last topic that I think is very important. It's one I spout to the heavens, but I think it's good for other people to say it too. So your last one?
The last one is, uh, make sure you try the watch on before you buy it. I have purchased watches in the past without putting them on the wrist, but I think it's a absolutely crucial part of the buying experience. And for me, within 30 seconds, 15 seconds of having a watch on the wrist, I know if it's going to work for me or not. I'll either connect with it instantly, or I'll
Yeah.
know this isn't the watch for me. So one example for me is, I've never owned a Longines. I really like their GMT, and I'm forgetting the designation, but it's got the green bezel and it has gilt hands, so 42 millimeter. I
Yeah.
think it's the Zulu time. Those
Yeah.
are great looking watches, but I got it on the wrist and it just felt flat, which is fine. I just knew that wasn't the watch for me. But I think if you skip that step in the process, you're setting yourself up for a watch that's not going to stay in the collection for very long.
Yeah. You definitely don't want that 30 to 60 seconds while you're sitting in your living room after you already paid for it.
Right.
You'd much rather have that 30 to 60 seconds in a store and you didn't exchange any
Exactly.
money. Yeah. I will scream that to the heavens. Like, I tell people all the time, because at work, I'm kind of known as a watch guy now. And I'll tell people, like, hey, just go to the exchange, go to any mall, go to a jewelry store, introduce yourself. Most of the time, they'll let you try stuff on, because, especially at the jewelers, they really want your business. They want you to come back. Family owned ones, a lot of times, they want to build that relationship. And you get to learn about them. You get some tactile experience with them. And then, you know, and it sucks because sometimes
Right.
you see something and you're like, oh man, I really like that. Then you try it on, you're like, it's not the greatest thing in the world.
Right.
So, the last segment of every show is I allow the guest to pick a charity or charities they like to talk about. So, feel free to do so, Rich.
So I've got two. First one is the Anti-Watch Watch Club, which you know well. I think they are really brilliant guys working really hard in the evenings and on the weekends, and achieving a really, really high level of success in not too much time. Uh, these guys all have day jobs, as you know, and they are putting in tons of time when the rest of us are watching TV to benefit veterans. And as a civilian, I will tell you, I had no context to appreciate what our men and women in uniform did for the last 20 years in the war on terror. And I credit the Sean Ryan show for giving me some level of understanding about what these folks go through. And I think they're asked to do a very specialized job with a very specialized skill set, and not enough is done to help those folks transition into civilian life after service is over. In my view, if I were in charge, there would be a much better support system for the off ramp for service people that leave the service and need to get a job, because I don't think this skill set is necessarily transferable to the degree it should. I think there should be more training. I think more support. I think a lot of folks leave the service because of the wars that we fought with emotional needs that aren't being met. And I think charities and organizations like Anti-Watch Watch Club and Wounded Warrior Project are providing that support that we as a nation should be giving but don't. So any support we can give to those folks is really well done.
Yeah, the AWWC guys are all great. 501c3 charitable organization. They've sponsored the podcast for a long time, and no money. I just do it because they let me use the name, and I get their message out because they really do a whole bunch of great stuff. And like you said, they do it all in their quote unquote free time. No one draws a
Right.
salary, none of that stuff. So. And what's the next one, Rich?
Next one is Narcotics Anonymous. I've had family members be affected by the opioid crisis, and it was a terrible toll on the country that still continues. So I support that organization too, and welcome anybody else to do it as well.
Yeah, I wrote my master's thesis on. I'll talk to you about that later on that very topic.
Right.
Yeah, back in 2016, it was stuff I found out through research was just crazy stuff.
I
But
believe it. It's very sobering.
yeah. So everybody check them out. Anti-Watch Club and Narcotics Anonymous. I'll make sure to put links in the show notes for those two. There's always an AWWC one, but I'll put the Narcotics Anonymous one in there too. And then, Rich, do you have any parting shots? Anything you'd like to say?
That's it. The only thing I will say is I really appreciate the way you collect watches. I like your focus. I like that you are not sort of swayed by hype watches, and you have got just a phenomenal 3-watch collection. That Vertex Grand Seiko dive watch and that Planet Ocean, that is a very enviable 3-watch collection. I know you've got others too. They're all terrific though.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And yeah, and I everyone to check out. It's Rich at Richard.Warren on Instagram, but I forget the number. 1907.
So I think it's at Richard Warren 1919. Let me pull it up to make sure.
So everyone can follow you on Instagram.
Richard_Warren 1919.
I'll put that in the show notes too, so everyone. But hey, Rich, I want to thank you for coming on and being a guest. It makes me happy to be able to get fellow watch enthusiasts on here and let them tell their stories through watches. And I also just want to say thanks for all the support you've been supportive about the podcast and the blog forever. Always great interactions. I think that's really indicative of who you are as a person, but also kind of like the circles that we run in, because it's just been, really positive, just really positive, and I don't want to get all like touchy feel like uplifting, but no, it's just like a positive experience, because at the end of the day, this is a hobby for us, and it's just a happy hobby lately.
Right.
It's like a lot of good, and I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all your support.
My pleasure. I mean, it's a great hobby, it's a great community, and you're doing a lot of great things. So supporting you is the easiest thing in the world.
Oh, I appreciate it, Rich. And for everyone watching, well, for us it's Saturday, but Saturday morning, but for everyone else, I hope you have a good rest of whatever your day is. And remember, everyone, at WatchRolling.com, you make the watch. The watch doesn't make you.
Take care.